Now, I don't know how many of you know this about me, but I am actually a graduate of one of the most prestigious and world-renowned academies, I guess you could say, in the entire world. And no, it's not the seminary. It's the United States Army Basic Combat Training. It's prestigious. It's known everywhere, right? Now, the first thing that everyone does when they join the Army, right, they go to basic training. And while it's true that you go there to learn all the basics of what it means to be a soldier, right, the most basic, the most fundamental of every lesson they teach you there is obedience. Mostly because the vast majority of those who enter the service lack that discipline or that virtue of obedience, at least in the amount that they require of you there. And if you remember, at the beginning of Lent, I kind of laid out a sort of principle or theme for each week, and those were based on the Old Testament readings. And for this week, we have Moses and the 10 Commandments, right? And for that theme, it was obedience. And that's mostly because everyone hates it. No one likes obedience. If you like obedience, then, I got a confessional back there. We can talk about it. But we live in a culture and a society today that chafes at the very notion of obedience. We are descendants in this country of a people that threw an entire ship's worth of tea into a harbor simply because we weren't going to listen to no wig-wearing king tell us how much tax we're going to pay. We're not going to do it. No thanks. We'll drink coffee instead. And the only tea time we're interested in the United States is at the golf course. That's just how we are, right? But from the very first day of basic training, it is all about obedience. They load you into a cattle trailer and then drop you off at your building where they proceed to scream and yell at you for 2 hours. That's how it begins. They begin to teach you everything they want you to do with preciseness. Your bed corners are to be at a 45-degree angle, not 60, not 30, 45. Your shoes are laced a certain way so that everyone's are the same. Your single little thanks for joining the Army ribbon that you get when you arrive is 1/8 of an inch above your pocket on your dress uniform, not 1/4 of an inch, not on the seam, 1/8 of an inch, centered. The first 4 weeks of basic training then are quite literally hell. Every single bed, over 100, must be made exactly the same way. If they're not, after you return from the training for the day, every single bed was thrown into the center of the barracks. It looked like a bomb went off. Sheets are everywhere. Wall lockers flipped over. And repeatedly, you had somebody bigger, faster, and stronger than you screaming in your face with his drill sergeant's hat inches away, calling you the most colorful adjectives you have ever heard in your life. Kids, if you think that your parents are strict about cleaning your room, you have no idea, right? But we need to maybe ask ourselves, what's the reason for all of this? Like, what are these rules for? Because believe it or not, there is a reason for it, even if the methodology is difficult to understand, and it relates to us and it relates to our readings today. The 10 Commandments for Israel served as the heart of the new covenant that was established on Mount Sinai. And covenants, by their nature, are not mere contracts. Covenants create families. That's why the blood of the sacrifices were sprinkled on the people after they agreed to the covenant. It kind of represented the people, in a sense, symbolically now sharing the same blood. It's not just a bunch of individuals anymore. It's one family bound together by covenant. But all families and all relationships, they must be governed by certain rules or laws, or else chaos reigns. The army is no different in a sense. While legally joining the army is more contractual, anyone who's lived it knows that the men and women you serve with, they're not simply employees. They're not simply somebody you see every day and that's it. They become your family. And nobody understands you better than somebody who has gone through the same trials, the same difficulties, the same challenges as you have. So the obedience required in the army is necessary because without it, the family can't function. But even more than that, the family is put in danger. When I was in the army, if I gave a soldier an order and he failed to complete it, then any future decision or order that I give that was dependent on that one order that I had given before, they will also fail. And if that happens in combat, people die. It's just that simple. So the obedience is severe because the consequences are severe. Basic training is simply the creation of muscle memory. If you're told by a superior, move, you move. It's not a debate. Nobody cares what your opinion is. You don't ask questions about it. You don't give your opinions. You don't contemplate your existence about what this order means to me. None of that happens. You obey. You move. And you obey because one day your ability to either obey or disobey could end up saving or costing a life, maybe even your own. But what eventually happens is that as you develop this virtue of obedience, you start to understand the why behind the what. And no private at basic training understands the why when they're given seemingly arbitrary commands. It's really not about the content of the order in a lot of ways at basic training. You could conceivably make a bed corner at 60 degrees or 30 degrees. You know, it would make me sick, but you could do it, right? The underlying goal is to train the private to follow orders. And all of this leads to the proper functioning of all of the soldiers together as a family. Eventually, in basic training, unless you want to become really strong, you get smart quickly, right? You eventually learn that if 2 or 3 soldiers simply check all of the beds, then they're all made the same way. If one soldier lines up every shoe in the barracks right on the tile line as it's supposed to be, then all of them are exactly the same. Dress right, dress, right? And over time, these young, formerly independent men and women begin to bond together and work as a team, a family. Chaos is managed, and then something really special happens. They begin to become free in a new way, because now they're able to accomplish far more than they ever could have done by themselves individually. And in a lot of ways, we're no different. We are a church family. We are bound together by a covenant that we're going to celebrate in just a few minutes. Our covenant has rules as well, because a covenant without rules is chaos. But over time, that same thing should happen to us that happened to those soldiers in the army. We should be moving from simply following rules for the sake of following rules to understanding the why that lies behind them. And understanding those causes us to love the rules all the more, just like the Psalm said. The law of the Lord is perfect. It revives the soul. But in this family, the stakes are far higher, even more than that in the army, because failure in this family doesn't simply result in death, but it results in an eternal separation from God. And that's why Father Barry and I, from time to time, stand up here and preach the way we do. We tell you hard truths at times. No one likes a drill sergeant. If they did, they're crazy. They probably need to go see somebody. But they're necessary. They're necessary in basic training. None of you, I'm sure, like to be told what to do, probably by anyone, much less us, right? But unlike the army, where we purposefully take away the freedom of those individuals for a time, let's say to encourage obedience, right? To make it a little bit quicker. We only have 9 weeks, right? That doesn't work here. You are all entirely free. You are free to obey. You are free to disobey, to listen, or to disregard. Nobody can force you into this family. I can't stand up here and force you to do much of anything, really. But a well-functioning family cannot exist without rules either. But here's the thing, the rules, they exist as a baseline, as a minimum, really to protect the family from that which will harm it. But once we understand the why, we're able to move beyond that, right? The rules actually set us free to do far more together as a family than we could have ever done by ourselves. So the rules, the virtue of obedience, it's necessary, but they're the minimum. That's why Catholicism, we have rules, but we aren't defined by the rules. St. Paul says there's no law that limits love, kindness, generosity. We don't have rules for that. You can go to the maximum for that. We do have rules that stop us from violating those things. Thou shalt not kill is a baseline minimum. I think all of us can get behind that. But there's no rule that says how much you can love life, how much you can pour yourself into the lives of others. I'm not stupid enough to make a rule against that because I want to see what everyone here does with that opportunity, with that maximum. The rules are just there to limit us from that which harm us. And so really the only limit on the maximum, I guess you could say, is whatever we place on ourselves.